Chapter 251, Chamber of Pain. It was hard not to feel good looking at the change to my status sheet. It was small but powerful. Law upgraded. Least law of wind, Tier 1, - lesser law of wind, Tier 2. Having both of my laws at Tier 2 was just another thing to check off the list. All that was left before I evolved was upgrading my body, which I was about to do, and cap off my bloodline, which was already close to being maxed. It was nice to have most of the things I wanted done accomplished ahead of time. Seeing how I only had a few more levels to go before 100, it was just in time as well. The few weeks or even months, if that were the case, of waiting if I reached the cap first wouldn't have been too bad. But to be ready for my evolution ahead of time felt good. Name: Christopher Zelensky. Race: E. Human *. Class: E. Hammer of the Jotner. Legendary. Level 92. Profession: E. Runesmith. Rare. Level 86. Affinity: Arctic. Faction: Frostheim. Leader: Title: Baron. Strength: 1645. Agility: 815. Perception: 492. Fortitude: 1191. Endurance: 975. Vitality: 605. Intelligence: 431. Wisdom: 687. Acumen: 418. Free points: 20. Laws: lesser law of ice, lesser law of wind. Body stage: body of wood, northern wind body. Mana heart: perfect ignition, stars of primordial frost. Spirit stage: anchor formation. I had only gained a few levels since the last time I looked at it, but I couldn't help but do so again. Only one level in my class was a blow, but I hadn't done that much other than my daily trip into the dungeons. My profession saw 2 levels, but that was only for some last-minute runesmithing to make sure everyone we took with us had state-of-the-art weapons. My free points were left to languish for now. I was most likely going to pour them into endurance again, but I held off for the time being. I hated having my stamina be a hindrance, but I also didn't want to single-mindedly keep going down the same road. I'd put nearly every free point into endurance for a while now. The fact it would make the refining process harder was another factor, if only a small one. 20 points on top of an already high endurance wouldn't do that much, after all. Additionally, I wanted to see what a body of stone would do before I did anything with the points. Body refining made the body tougher and harder to damage, but it also made the pool of stamina I could pull from deeper. It didn't increase by anything huge, but enough I wanted to test the difference. And, with my newest change, I wanted to see what my mana heart would do. Pushing my body to stone would affect that as well. My office was eerily quiet as I finished up the last of the paperwork I had to do. With my new assistant, Sophia, there wasn't a lot I had to do. It took a few weeks to get her up to speed, but she was already doing a wonderful job. It helped that she gained levels like crazy for the first week. Apparently, being the assistant to not only a pylon owner, but a baron as well was a game changer. Who'd have thought? She flew through the last few levels of F rank like it was nothing. The experience kept rolling in until she was a few levels into E rank 2. She eventually slowed down, but she was still rising quickly. Her evolution was another big step in what she could handle. She evolved to be a noble's assistant, not just an ordinary assistant, which was a step up in rarity. The eerie quiet was from her not being here. She was usually picking over paperwork in my stead or being called on to do something around the castle, but she was out for the day, working with Abigail and the farmers to make sure the coming planting went smoothly. The ground was just beginning to thaw and they needed to get the jump on when it was ready. Our population growth made food a growing concern that they were handling personally. Plus, I asked for a surplus of grain to be planted so we could finally make some good beer. Mead was good and all, but a nice cold beer went a long way. With the last of what needed my attention taken care of, and Sophia notified that I would be out of contact for a week or 2, there was nothing left to do. Nothing pressing I could use to put off going into the chamber. My body shivered just thinking about it. The phantom pain made real for a split second. Maybe it scarred me more than I admit. Still, I pushed the chair away from my desk and made my way out of the castle. There wasn't a large audience this time as everyone had things they needed to do. Everyone was either trying to get one last upgrade before we left or making sure we had the supplies necessary for our journey. Only one person was so nonchalant to stand with a toothy grin at my face of dread. "Oh, cheer up, Buttercup. It's not that bad." His voice was chipper and upbeat, the polar opposite of how I felt. "Says the person who put off doing it for years." I snapped back. "Hey, there's no need for insults. I eventually did it, and that's all that matters." Austin pointed out. I had built his little glass abomination strictly so he couldn't put it off anymore. Austin wasn't scared of much, but Vincent and my detailed recounting of the pain was one of them. Whether it was his mother going through the process or if he finally gathered the courage that pushed him over the edge, I wasn't sure, but he did it. He was out for a few days but came back as bubbly as ever, which was how I knew it hurt him. He always overcompensated with his Austin-ness when he felt the contrary. "Yeah, but Stone will be worse. I just know it," I said. It wasn't something I knew from books or from hearing about it. It was something I felt. The first upgrade had to tear down my body to build it back up better. The second upgrade had to do the same, but now there was a lot more to tear down. It would take a lot more effort and a lot more pain, which I wasn't looking forward to. Austin followed after me as I neared the building and made jokes along the way trying to cheer me up, which wasn't helping. "You look like you're heading for the gallows," he snarked. "Think of the positives. Once you come out, you'll be even more monstrously strong. Not that you need it." The last part was muttered, but I still heard it. "And," he drew out dramatically, "I'll have a gift waiting for you when you get out, so don't take too long." I didn't get long to think about the gift, if it truly was a gift and not a prank, Austin mentioned as the building came into sight not long after and I had to fight my feet to keep walking toward it. Sam and Ashley, along with a few other select healers, stood at the ready. The extras were chosen for their unique skills, either in long-range vital monitoring or other specialized abilities. There was nothing I or any other could make that would survive the atmosphere I would be in. No wristband or tag would hold up so they could monitor me from afar. The team of healers noticed our approach and turned my way. Sam, at their head, said, "We're ready when you are." Great, can't even count on her to delay. Gathering myself as best I could for what was to come, I took a deep breath and moved toward the door. "One last thing, amigo." Austin's voice stopped me. "Do you mind if I borrow Sarah for a teeny favor?" He held his fingers close together to accentuate how small a favor it would be. I stopped. "Not if she says no, but if she agrees, I don't mind." Sarah had grown up a lot since we first met her in the woods. It was sad that she had had to, but she wasn't the little girl we encountered anymore. Jonathan had taken her in and shown her the ropes well. "Perfect," he said excitedly. "Have fun in the chamber of pain." He twirled and ran off faster than I could keep up with. Austin. His feet touched down on the rough stone of the inner wall and turned back to watch. Chris had dragged his feet, but it was hard to blame him. Austin had put off going through it much longer than Chris had. Austin watched as his friend took one last deep breath, steeled himself, and entered the building. It wasn't long after that lights inside the building began to flare and the buildup of power could be felt. Even from as far away as he was, he could feel the mana the formations were swirling. He was intimately familiar with what happened next and didn't have the heart to stay and watch. Instead, he went off in search of a little girl. Well, when put like that, it didn't sound very good. Plus, she wasn't a little girl any longer. She'd be near driving age if the world hadn't ended. The main reason he mentioned anything ahead of time and ruined the surprise for what he was about to do was to give Chris something to think about. If it helped Chris deal with the pain to wonder about what Austin was up to and what surprise awaited him, it was worth it. The surprise wasn't that large. At least Austin didn't think so. He'd had the idea for a while now, and it was only recently he had the chance to go through with it. Chris would be out for a while, and Abigail was tied up with the farmers. Both the ruling parties were busy, which was the perfect time for some mischief. Not that what he was doing could be called mischief. At most, it was a rather unexpected gift, one that required Sarah. Finding her was rather easy, as she frequented only a few places. the kennel being one of them. The wolves were far from being small any longer, and it was funny to watch the small woman fight through the small pack of them. Austin, being the caring and nice person he was, waited until she came out of the kennel before getting her attention. Not because it smelled horrible in there and he didn't want to get covered in dog hair and saliva. "Sarah, young Snow White, do you have a second?" he called out. She bristled at the nickname but walked over nonetheless. "Austin, what do you want?" She was rather pointed, but it was warranted. He didn't know her that well after all. "Do you have a moment to go on an adventure with me?" he asked mysteriously. "No, I don't have the time. I still have to prep the horses. Jonathan has something planned for later, and my slot in the dungeon is coming up." She huffed and wiped a stray hair out of her face. It was disappointing to hear, but not enough to make him give up. "It'll be fun," he taunted to no avail based on her unchanged face. "Come on. Don't you want to go beyond the walls and explore?" That got her attention. "Beyond the walls? How far?" Hook. "Oh, I don't know. A few hours travel away. Not that far," he said. "That's further than I'm allowed," she said. Austin's smile grew. "Oh, and who sets these boundaries? Are you not allowed to go where you want?" It was a thin line between mocking and insulting to get the job done. Her face turned defiant, and Austin knew he had her. "Line. I can go wherever I want to go," she said firmly. "Oh, perfect. So you'll go with me?" he asked. "Sinker." "Fine," she said. "How long will it take?" Austin's excitement grew. "Well, that depends on you, Your Highness." "Oh, this is perfect." She had to stop by the castle to grab a few things, but so did Austin for that matter. He wasn't exactly sure how long this was going to take, but it was longer than a few hours. A white lie or two never hurt anybody. Austin had to do the lying for two people now that Chris didn't anymore. "I can't wait to see his face when I come back with it." Chapter 252. Gift? Chris. 10 days. 10 days of utter agony. 10 days filled with nothing but pain and suffering. 10 days. "All right, I get it. You got a boo-boo," Austin remarked, annoyed. Austin was right to be annoyed. I had complained about it since I woke up, which probably didn't sound the best. Even though it was. No, don't dwell on the past. The past was behind me and I could focus on the future. A future that had me one step closer to evolving. With my newest notification to confirm, I was only one step away from being ready. Body stage upgraded. Body of wood - body of stone, northern wind's body. After being out of commission, the polite way to put it, for 10 days, I required 2 more days of intense healing and slothful recovery. The healing wasn't as bad as the demon fight, as I hadn't lost any limbs, but it did have to be thorough. My body went through a traumatic experience and a touch-up was necessary. I spent most of the 2 days resting anyway. Being awake for 10 straight days was a challenge in its own right. My endurance was high, but 10 days of vigorous exertion was still a challenge. If I'd sat and done nothing, 10 days still would have been hard to accomplish. My forge was the coldest room in the castle now that winter had waned, no small part because of the spirit fire it housed, and I had a nice relaxing rest in there. Cold meditation helped get my mind on straight after. No, don't think about it. The skill worked wonders, and that was all I was going to say about it. The healers and my assistant didn't appreciate the cold, but they could shove it. Both had to layer up before entering, but it wasn't like they were getting frostbite or anything. Austin was radiating heat along with a subtle glow as he stood to ward it off, and I had to fight the annoyance it caused. "Come on. It's been long enough, you big baby. I still have my surprise to show you," he said happily and not at all like he just insulted me. "Is it actually a surprise? Or am I about to walk out and see a donkey's ass in my face?" I said from my bed. I had it moved to be more comfortable. Austin put his hand to his chest offendedly. "I would nev dash." "Yeah, that's totally something I would do, but I didn't this time." He apparently didn't have enough sarcasm to get through lying with a straight face. "Fine, lead on." Rising from my bed still elicited some soreness and pain, but it was about time for me to get up and walk around. Laying in bed all day was getting boring anyway. My body was different and would take time to get used to fully, but I had enough wherewithal to walk at least. Austin led me on a merry trip throughout the castle and out into the courtyard. We were still within the inner wall, so it was piquing my curiosity to what he did. If it was anything dangerous, Abigail wouldn't have allowed it within the walls. He asked for Sarah, so I had assumed it was an animal of some sort, but I wasn't sure what. After exiting the castle, he dragged me over towards the stables. They were mainly built for Sarah, but they housed all the horses of our family. Remy especially, as I liked having him close. I didn't get to ride him as much as I wanted, but I was still around to groom him occasionally when I had the time. And, standing out of his usual stall, the black stallion was not happy. I heard his unhappiness even before the stable came into view. That's questionable. Whatever it was made my horse upset, which limited the options. Austin brushed up next to me, closer than was necessary, and began to raise his arms. If you're about to cover my eyes, I'll hit you. He put some distance between us at the threat. Spoil sport, he said under his breath. At least close your eyes. Little did he know I could already feel what his surprise was. My aura was still something I was figuring out, but I had enough mastery over it to tell there was a new addition inside the stables. And the new addition was not a horse. It was much more powerful than even Remy, and he had gained some levels over the years. It was also large. The feeling I was getting was of something with some weight behind it. I already had a guess as to what it was, and I wasn't about to close my eyes. Instead, he used his body to try and block my view as we entered, but he was far from big enough to do that. His body did practically nothing to block my sight from the multi-ton furry creature that now occupied our stable. The sole creature in the stable, as it took up so much space nothing else could fit. It was taller than I was at around 10 feet from hoof to shoulder and nearly double that in length. Its girth made me worried about the floor of the stable, as it was hefty enough to put divots in it. There were slight depressions from its tracks, but not so much to cause alarm. Whoever built this did a wonderful job. Said Heft shifted at our entrance but ignored us not long after, going back to munching on some grass. At least it's docile. I wasn't sure the structure would handle it if the beast decided it didn't want to be there. Tada! Austin hopped out of the way like he was doing a grand reveal. It's not what I wanted, but it was all I could find. It's a bison, I said. Austin smiled. I know. Cool, right? Not quite sure how to respond. I said nothing and let him continue. Now that you're a lord and all, I figured you needed a mount to match your stature. I was aiming for a woolly rhino but couldn't find one. The damn things are elusive, and without following them into the frozen north, we came up empty-handed. He genuinely looked disappointed at not finding one. Instead, he pointed at the bison. I got the next best thing. Looking over the beast, I had to admit it was formidable. Identify put it in the high 90s level-wise, but that wasn't all. It felt strong, and it clearly had some weight behind it. A charge would devastate whatever it hit. Person, building, wall, it wouldn't matter with that much momentum running into it. The thought brought a smile to my face. Sure, I'd imagined charging into battle on Remy, but I knew he wasn't strong enough for the kinds of battles I partook in. This, though, was perfect. Now, before you say no or that you don't want it, I have to admit I didn't exactly keep acquiring its secret, Austin said offhandedly. Before I could correct him and say that I did want it, I caught the end of what he said. What's that supposed to mean? He looked abashed. Well, when people saw me returning with what they assumed would be your mount, some didn't want to be left out. I took a deep breath. Austin, are you telling me there's a herd of bison in our city now? How would we feed them? How would we keep watch? How would W? There you go with the negatives again. He waved. I like to think about the positives. Instead of worrying about a herd of bison, think of it like your new cavalry order. Or whatever they call themselves. I struggled with what to say. Just imagine a line of these puppies thundering into battle. He patted the one in front of us. It'll be amazing. After petting the very large creature, Austin turned to leave the stables while I was stuck trying to think through everything he just dropped on me. I honestly thought his gift was going to be something stupid or a prank, not an entire herd of bison. On an entirely unrelated note, We'll be having steaks for dinner tonight, and it's better for everybody if you don't ask where they came from." With that said, he disappeared out the stable doors, and I felt him fleeing my range quickly. He left me alone with the beast, and all I could do was stare at it. "What in the hell am I going to do with you?" It wasn't until Sophia found me and told me dinner was ready that I broke out of my funk. I was only gone for a short time, and so much had changed. In celebration of gaining a body of stone, a family dinner was prepared and nearly everyone was present for it. The room was easily large enough for everyone, and the table was specifically built for such an occasion. There I was, stalking through the frozen wastes on the hunt for my quarry. The beast stood proud in the distance. Austin waxed his quest to find the bison like it was some grand epic. Anna and Josh were laughing it up. Even Lily, a usually quiet kid who kept to herself, was giggling at Austin's story. Most of the adults knew the story for what it was, a wild exaggeration, but smiled and looked on anyway. Only a few in the room had pinched faces or had the urge to bring a hand to their face. Abigail specifically, as she had to find a way to house, feed, and take care of a number of animals she was unprepared for. Austin's story wrapped up with howling laughter from the children as he described hopping on the bison's back and riding it into the city like he owned the place, which was decidedly untrue. Sarah told me they still weren't saddle-trained, which was a mark against them being ridden for any reason. Seeing how awesome and regal I looked, everyone else rushed out to get one of their own. Austin finished. "Mom, can we get one?" Both Anna and Josh turned on Abigail with pleading eyes. She turned to Austin with a death stare that he only smirked at. "Why don't we stick with the dog for now?" She still struggled to call it a dog. They had worn her down for weeks to get her to agree to that animal, and I highly doubted they would convince her about the bison. Having Sarah's assurances that it was well-trained was the only reason she agreed in the first place. Both pouted disappointedly. "I'm still baffled at how you did it in such a short time," I said. "I was gone for barely a week." "Oh, my friend. You'd be surprised what I can get accomplished in a week," Austin bragged. "What you can accomplish?" I questioned. "What did you do exactly?" I thought Sarah was the one who did all the work. "Bah, semantics," he dismissed. "I found them, and that was most of the work. All Snow White had to do was sing fancy words a few times." "A few times," I clarified. "The numbers Sophia brought me said there were 34 new cavalry units in the city. 34 was far from being considered a few. Sarah didn't tame them all," he said. "There's more than one tamer in the city." I forgot. I always pictured only Sarah when it came to animal-related tasks that I forgot that others took up the class. Not all were strictly tamers and instead evolved to work with the beasts, but we were far from needing to get a young girl to be our sole tamer. "I can't wait until someone gets the class for Bison Cavalry." Austin barely contained his mirth. "Bison Cavalry!" He burst out in laughter before regaining his composure in a temporary seriousness. No, there's something even better. Bison Knights." I did have to admit, it was funny to picture. Chapter 253, Stingy System. "Who?" Breath escaped me in a giant plum that frosted up the air, and for once, it wasn't because of the outside temperature. That came strictly from me. My bloodline drove my body temperature down, and while it wasn't enough for ice crystals to form on my body anymore, it was enough to fog up my breath. My hammer swam through the air in vicious arcs as I trained, getting used to my new strength. The upgrade to my body was much more pronounced this time than the first. I should have expected it. Every subsequent upgrade was more than the last. The initial building blocks of my foundation were paving the road for the power that was slowly being accumulated. Refining my body didn't come with a stat point adjustment. It didn't suddenly increase my strength or fortitude by a number I could see and expect. It was more nuanced than that. Having my mana heart go haywire for a few days was also outside my expectations. The runes lining my heart, carved into it in frost, adjusted to my body's increased capability. My mana pool grew, and so did its regeneration. The concentration stayed the same. I had to get Gabriel to test that as I didn't have good enough senses for it, but the other two increased. It wasn't a large change, but it was still welcome. I let the bloodline energy burning through me go and felt the changes slip away. It was still odd to get used to growing and shrinking, if only by a few inches. After getting back on my feet, I had to readjust to practically everything. An all-around boost like this was more than I was used to. Speed, reaction, strength, fortitude, constitution. This refinement pointed out all the places my body was different in large, highlighted swaths. Body of wood was a stark change, but this was something else. Not only did I have to get used to my body normally, but with everything I could do to it as well. While my status claimed I had 1,600 or so points in strength, that could very quickly change depending on the conditions. Momentum of the avalanche, fury, glacial presence, all three had a way to push that further. Those, including my bloodline, resulted in a major difference from when I was just training normally. My goal was to get used to them one at a time, and my bloodline was the easiest to call upon. Avalanche would have to come from the dungeon or when another wave came. Fury was easy enough to activate, but I didn't want to use it unnecessarily as dealing with the aftereffect wasn't exactly pleasant. Presence altered its boost a lot, which made practicing with that one the hardest. The weather would change how effective the boost was. Swinging my hammer at nothing always felt silly to me, but it was the only way to get used to it again. I tried to imagine aiming at phantom enemies, but even that didn't help. I didn't know any set forms or weapon techniques. All I could do was swing at what felt like the right pace, which made it hard to feel like I was doing anything worthwhile. That was, until a very chipper Austin came skipping over to me in the courtyard. "You ready?" he asked, all decked out in his new armor. Sam had done good work with the leather and Vincent forged the plates wonderfully. It was a touch upsetting that my part in his armor was diminished, but I knew Vincent was a better forger than me. Still, I had my hand in it by enchanting it. Some of my best work, too. My rune engraving abilities rose more steadily than my fighting capability, but they still rose with practice. Practice I was getting a lot of. My skills only had a few upgrades to show for it, but it wasn't nothing. "I guess," I said and packed away my things. I didn't bring much with me, but I knew better than to leave them out. "You guess." I basically had to bribe Abigail's assistant to get me a slot in the dungeons. Austin complained. "Calm down, bud. I'm just messing with you." With my things packed, I walked after him toward the dungeons. What Austin brought up was beginning to become an issue. While we had 2 dungeons, when other settlements only had 1, it still wasn't enough for the entire city. There were only so many people who could delve in a day, and we had reached that point. Feeding the dungeons mana crystals from the mine helped, in addition to making them grow faster, but it still wasn't enough. A waitlist had to be made and slots had to be divvied out. I made sure the orders all got some, and that my family did, but that took away from the thousands of people who wanted to delve. The only way around it was for the dungeons to grow another floor, or to start branching out to ones further away. We had 2 in our immediate vicinity, but there were others a day or 2 travel away. It would be annoying to travel there and back, but it would increase the amount of people able to go in them. Some had already begun doing so. Everyone was trying to get last-minute levels or skills before we left. We were only a few days away from the date we needed to leave, and the hustle had gradually picked up as we closed in. I was not looking forward to the trip, but there was nothing I could do about it. We would meet up with Marcus in his city before heading further south together. Since our final destination was on the same river, it felt like common sense to use it to our advantage. Except, from Marcus's recent messages, that was easier said than done. He was confident that with our faction's help, travel over the water would be fine, but we allotted a few extra days in our planning just in case. That way, if a boat got damaged or something held us up, we would still make it on time. "Hey Chris, I've got a question for you." We weren't rushing toward the dungeons, and the walk took a few minutes to get there, which left ample time for conversation. "Yeah. Have you ever tried combining your laws?" The question was a bit out of the blue, but not all that unexpected. Austin was one of the few with multiple laws. Fewer still with an affinity that encompassed both, like I was. "Yeah, a little. Nothing I've done has worked out yet," I answered. "You?" Austin nodded. "Same here. I thought I'd get them to merge when I upgraded my fire law to Tier 2, but they still remain separated. They work together well and all, but they refuse to merge. Maybe we're missing something. What do you think it is? If I knew that, I would have told you by now. Oh, come on, you have to have a guess at least. A hunch, Austin pleaded. I'm not sure, but I feel like we're missing a piece of the puzzle. The sun is more than just fire and light. Maybe we need to find how they combine better. It was my hunch when upgrading my wind law. Going into it, I used my wind law as supplementary to my ice law. I gained it purely to make my cold more effective and upgraded it along those lines. Both times it was to make wind compatible with ice. My ice law was the opposite. Not once did I explore how it would mesh with wind. Now that I was looking back and exploring combining them, I felt it was a mistake. I've tried that though, Austin said. I've tried to merge them for a while now but never could. Maybe you need another one? I said. Maybe gravity? Ugh. That sounds complicated. He sighed. Do you even know anyone with a gravity law? No, I said. At most, I knew someone with a kinetic law, which was freaky. It was invisible to all but mana senses. Austin didn't respond and instead looked thoughtful. How come you're asking? I questioned. Worried about your evolution? Who isn't? He snarked. What can I say? You've set a standard now. Everyone's doing all they can before evolving. He looked more contemplative than usual, which sparked a thought. Wait, what level are you? He was fighting in Minnesota for a while. If I was close to 100, he should be too. Austin's profession gave him a blocker stronger than I could get through, which made his level a mystery. 99, he said. I capped my profession a while ago, and I'm only one away from the big day. Wow, that's a lot closer than me. It doesn't matter though. I still don't have anything to evolve with. I want wings, damn it. He lamented. He brought up a point that kept a lot of people from evolving. Even with the upgrade to our pylon, it still wasn't enough to buy things from off-planet, and evolution materials were hard to come by. The auction house/trading hall/marketplace was still in the process of being built. Jonathan's new linking ability as our head merchant was our last hope. Parts could be gathered from the surroundings, but finding the exact creature you needed was damn near impossible. I doubted there were frost giants on Earth. Austin's case was easier. The odds of there being something he could use were a lot higher than mine. Gabriel had it the easiest. Connor's contact came through and managed to distill the Arctic fox bloodline without ruining the parts. So not only did he gain a bloodline, but he also had the materials ready to evolve. Hal had yet to find a griffin, and we were too far away from the ocean to even look for the water bloodline parts we needed. Jonathan didn't have any luck either. It wasn't even worth it to mention Rachel, but she knew that going into her bloodline. You think we'll get anything good if we pass? Austin asked. What, like a reward? I said. Yeah, he said. We got a reward from the tutorial. Why's it such a leap to get one for a test? We're already getting a reward. The continued protection from outside forces. Yeah, but what about personal rewards? For those who actually participate in the fighting. I'm not arguing against you, Austin. I want there to be a reward as well, but nothing I or Abigail says there will be. Stingy fucking system, Austin muttered. The entrance of the dungeon came into view, and we were at a natural stopping point in our conversation anyway. As the timer closed in on 0, people from all across the continent readied their forces for what was to come. All knew the importance of the tests and sent their best and brightest to face it. It would be the single largest gathering of people since the change. One that no one wanted to miss. From the far reaches of the north to the coastal cities in the south, all who could spare the men were preparing to make the journey. In 13 separate places around the globe, people were converging on what would be the first meeting between champions. Only one continent didn't have an obelisk people were traveling towards, and that was only because there were no inhabitants on it. Not that anybody knew that. Communication between the continents was still non-existent. Some were even split in half, turning into separate land masses altogether from an outside point of view. Other than being a meeting point for all the various factions, it would be the first time nobles came into contact with one another. Some had already met, but those were few and far between. A gathering of champions, if one were to put a label on it, was well underway. Chapter 254, Leaving Home. This wagon's done. Get ready for the next. I'm missing a strap over here. Go. Go. Move it. These supplies won't load themselves. The staging grounds were working people into a flurry. Anyone with a profession even tangentially related to logistics was recruited to ensure everything flowed efficiently and effectively. We weren't going to force them to come along for the journey, only so that we had all the supplies we needed packed and readied in a timely manner. We had enough volunteers that we were more than set for the journey ahead without resorting to conscription. Sophia, I called out to my assistant. How many more wagons need to be loaded? The blonde girl looked down at the sheets of paper she carried around and answered quickly, 14, my lord. If only she stopped doing that. Ever since being my assistant allowed her to upgrade into a noble's assistant, she was rather insistent on using the title. Nothing I did could get her to stop. I knew enough about what was happening to not be lost, but I let Sophia and Abigail handle most of the preparations. The three, including Abigail's assistant Grace, did a great job of organizing everything. It was better than what I could have pulled off, that was for sure. Counting out the wagons that had already been loaded and looking over the supplies that were waiting to be, something stuck out. I didn't believe it to be a mistake, but I had to ask. It looks rather light on food, I said. The personnel that were coming with us were the strongest we had. Both orders, along with an assortment of others who volunteered to come along, were all preparing for the journey. Being the highest-leveled people in our city, they had a similar high-level appetite. Eating at level food was fine, but eating down, like we commonly did, made us rather voracious eaters, and I didn't see enough to support us for the long journey. It can't be helped. We took all we could afford to. Any more and the city would starve. Sophia commented, a ration is already in place as well. Any more and we risk destabilizing the city. Our population boom didn't help matters. We were expecting another exponential growth this year as well, which only added to the complexity. Numerous farms and acres of farmland were cleared, plowed, and ready to feed everyone, but they wouldn't start producing for at least a few months. Certain farms would be faster as they had gained levels from the previous year, but it would still be a few weeks. I frowned. I wasn't looking forward to rationing my food, but I would make do. Sophia saw my face and hurried to explain. We will forage for what we can, but this early in the season, there won't be much. We've already spoken with a few nature mages and druids who think they should be able to speed that up, but we won't know until the time comes. We will make do, I stated. We already planned to resupply when we hit the twins. What I saw would last us until we made it there, and if not, we would go hungry for a few days. Not ideal, but doable. How does our timeline look? We should reach the twins in 26 days. After that, it depends on the river, she said. Austin's initial journey there took months, but that was because he meandered about instead of walking in a straight line. Abigail's journey there and back took a little over a month each way. Our estimation was on the inclusion of caravan leaders and wagoneers. Their professions provided them with skills to expedite travel. Merchants and traders had similar skills but were less useful in the size we were dealing with. Their specialties dealt more with single carts or only a couple, not the amount we had. There were also a few bards that were willing to tag along for the journey. They wouldn't participate in the fighting, but they were more than happy to provide their services. Give everyone a pep in their step. I wasn't the biggest fan of bards, but they had uses I couldn't ignore. At the rate I was seeing everything go, it would only be another hour until the wagons were set and ready, which meant it was time to ready everyone else. Are they? It hurt to say it. Bison cavalry ready? Sophia stifled a laugh. Yes, and they are prepared to take Icebreaker with them. The name my bison was given was out of my control. Some members of the order got together and found the name poetic and started calling it that. As soon as it caught on, it was impossible to root out. Maybe I'm not feared enough. Twice in a short time people were too stubborn to relent to my wishes. I should be happy they disagree with me. It was a relief that people got their spines back, but not when it came to stupid names. Remy was mightily upset at Austin's gift, but I wouldn't be riding the bison south. No one would for that matter. Sarah and the few beast handlers we had didn't have enough time to train the animals for people to ride, let alone for battle. They were set to continue their work as we traveled and would hopefully get them in working order in time. The addition would slow us somewhat, but not by any significance. I had to write Marcus for an extra boat to be prepared, but I was told he would handle it. Notify me when things are ready, I told Sophia. I need to speak with Vincent and Sam before we leave. Our resident smith and leatherworker would be in charge while all of us were gone. I wasn't pleased with leaving our city as weak as we were, but that was the purpose of all the work I put into it. The wards, enchantments, and fortifications. They were all built for the sole purpose of protecting my family while I wasn't there. I needed to trust in the blood, sweat, and hard work I, and everyone else, put into its creation. A few others were staying behind, but most were coming with me. Even Connor, who was usually content to stay in his lab, decided to come. Our final number was 841, double how many marched previously. Only double the numbers, but well over double the power. Levels, gear, skills, experience, laws, even anchors. The people gearing up to leave were heads and shoulders above the greenhorns who did so last time. It was sad. Sad that it wasn't the first. Sad because it wouldn't be the last. It wasn't long before we set out. This is impressive. I'll give them that much. The sight was more than I anticipated. The bridge is new, Austin said. That wasn't here last time. Neither were the walls. They were hastily built barricades more than anything. Nothing like those. Travel went quickly, and while there were a few days of light eating, it was far from being a problem. A few hunters and nature mages did their best, and we made do. I had to restrain my larger appetite, but so be it. Everyone was excited to finally arrive at our destination. Those who had been here before were drained of all their stories by those who hadn't. With little else to pass the time, fireside stories were some of our best entertainment. Other than watching people fall off bison, but that got dull rather quickly. What stood before me was impressive for the time they had in building it. Including the hardship they went through, they took less time than we did. Thick walls of blue-washed granite stood tall and ranged around the city. They didn't hold the same indomitable feeling ours did, but they were still an impressive sight in their own right. There wasn't a large castle at the center or a fortress in the making. Instead, it was only a bustling population center inside. It also forewent an inner wall, relying instead on the singular ring for protection. But that wasn't all they had for protection. Lining the walls were weapons of war that had seen use in combat. The stories Austin told were enough to tell me that much. Catapults mainly, instead of our chosen siege weapon, but with interspaced ballistae to back them up. Towers dominated every 100 or so feet with additional weapons of their own. While I didn't have the vision others did, I could pick out men and women walking up and down the length of wall on patrol from here. I was too far away to make out their gear, but they seemed experienced from the way they strode around with purpose. Other than the large wall to dominate the view, the river took up the rest. It was much larger than it should have been. The Mississippi was large, I knew that much and had seen it before, but this was where it started. It didn't get to its monstrous size until a few more waterways merged into it, yet here it was, wide and rushing. Spanning the wide river was a masterfully built bridge made of stone and had thick pillars spearing through the current and holding up its weight. The expanse of farms was nearly lost compared to the stout works of art that drew the eye. Even as they were being worked and people moved up and down the countless rows, it was hard to take notice of them compared to everything else. I thought you said it was more of an army encampment than a city, I questioned Austin. He looked just as flabbergasted as the people seeing it for the first time. It was when I left. Most of this is new. The gates stood open and inviting as their scouts long ago picked us up, and if they hadn't, the runner we sent ahead would have. Through them, a glimpse of what the wall hid could be seen. A straight and clean road for as far as I could make out. People walked with purpose to where they had to be porting supplies and materials. The framework and bones of the structures were similar enough to ours. Multi-story and a mixture of wood and stone, but that was where the similarities ended. Due to the snowfall we experienced, roofs had to have steep peaks. If not, they would cave in from the accumulated weight. Buildings made entirely of stone could get around this, like my castle, but most wooden buildings couldn't. While I didn't doubt they saw their fair share of snow, the buildings didn't represent that. They had flatter pitches. Not flat and still steeper than average homes from before, but not the same as home. They also had a lot more windows. Windows were the worst when it came to heat retainment, which the people here didn't have to worry about as much. Other than the architecture being different, it was the clothing that I noticed next. The clothes followed in a similar manner. Fewer layers, fewer people wearing fur, and a lot of lighter, breezier cloth instead of thick hides. I had to admit we were halfway through spring and the onset of summer was near, but it was still odd. When we left, people were only just starting to lose the winter layers. Everyone took in the new city, and even I spent a fair share of time looking around at everything as we closed in. Tracy's camp was a far cry from a city, and Ashton's didn't count. Both paled in comparison to what was built here. Meeting us a step inside the gate was who I assumed to be an aide or assistant of some kind. He wore better-made clothes, and they were clearly not for leisure. It wasn't a suit and didn't have a tie or bow, but it was still fancier than what I saw the people working the fields wearing. He bowed slightly, another indication this wasn't frost time, and greeted us. "Welcome to the Twin Cities. The Lord is waiting for you. My name is Gregory, and I will be your guide." Coming up from his bow, the man had a sincere smile on his face and a disarming happiness about it. It unnerved me. Lead on. Chapter 255. Marcus. The city passed us by quickly, but there was still enough time for me to pick up a few more things. My perception stat wasn't that great for my level, but it was enough. It was funny how much this place reminded me of home. It was lively, worry-free, and jovial. Taverns held laughter and smiles could be seen on the people we passed. From the way Austin described the world, it made it sound like all happiness had been sucked out of it. It was nice to see other places had made it back on their feet other than home. Ashton City was still working to get there. From what our scouts reported and the one time I walked through, he still had a way to go before all the issues at the fort were fixed. Instead of being led to a castle that sat at the center of the city, or a central fortification, it was only a manor. A highly decorated one with a significant bearing, but merely a house all the same. Similar to most other construction we passed, it was comprised of old bones and new furnishings. It was clear which parts were older construction and which were new. The building practices were the same, so there wasn't a strange dissonance in terms of architectural practices, but the materials used were wildly different. Not to mundane sight, but to everything else, the newness and subtle power they held was easy to spot compared to the old. The butler, as that was how he appeared, led us through the manor with ease and efficiency. The inside was similar to the outside but with slight changes. The various buildings outside looked to be militaristic, but only now beginning to branch out into individuality. Signs and coloring, windows and ornamentation all seemed newer than the buildings themselves. Here, that was more closely resembled. Paintings, probably ripped from somewhere important, hung on the walls, and the walls were very recently redone. It was sad there weren't any trophies hung on the walls or spoils of war. Seeing how similar our two cities were, I expected there to be at least a few insect parts from their war with the bugs. Instead, it was a normal house. Well, as close to normal as one could get nowadays. "Through here, please." Another bow I had to not grimace at. I always found them distasteful. Sure, they were supposed to portray respect or deference, but that never sat right with me. One shouldn't have to debase themselves so another could feel important. Saying nothing, I pushed through the doors and entered into a grand meeting room. It wasn't enough to be called opulent, but it was a step above the hallways and rooms we passed through. Just like we did. Our castle was mostly bare except for a few select spots. The meeting room where we met guests was one of them. Good impressions and all. A large window on the far side of the room opened it up a bit and let plenty of light stream in while also giving a wonderful view of the city below. We were a few stories up, which gave the window a height advantage, but it still wasn't enough to see over the walls. Still, what could be viewed was substantial. Inside the room sat a large table with enough space for a number of chairs. Only two sat at the ready now on opposite sides, but more would fit comfortably. One was occupied, and after I walked through the door, it shut behind me, leaving the two of us the only people in the room. Coming into the meeting, I knew of his description. Both Austin and Abigail had already met him and described him to me, but it was another to see him face to face. Short, black hair and a cleanly shaven face. A sturdiness in his frame that spoke of power but not too much to be called bulky or fat. Similar to my own in a way. There were no glaring muscles or bulging biceps. Marcus was a touch taller than me by a few inches, but not too much. His clothes were well made and looked fancy, similar but better than the butler's. My own clothes weren't a match for how fancy his were, but I didn't care for things like that. Outside the physical, neither Abigail nor Austin got the man's bearing right. Austin said his presence demanded respect and that he gave off natural leadership, and Abigail had claimed similar. That wasn't what he felt like to me. This man was a force to be reckoned with. He didn't demand respect, it was what weaker people's instincts defaulted to when meeting something above them. He held it back well, but I could tell. I felt slightly threatened, and that was saying something. It made me wonder how many steps he'd taken. The deep well of mana I could feel from him spoke of having a mana cultivation of some kind, but bodies were harder to probe. Without drowning the man in my aura, I wasn't able to tell, and that wasn't how I wanted our first meeting to go. His law was similarly in question. I knew he had a Tier 2 water law, but it was possible he held others. Fighting him would be fun, but I knew we wouldn't come to blows. Unless something went horribly wrong, but I doubted that. Ashton had a similar bearing the first time I met him, but he wasn't able to keep up. Looking back on it now, it was mostly a mixture of meeting someone so strong for the first time and underestimating myself that I even considered us similar. Marcus blew Ashton out of the water. The only other difference from the picture I'd been given was the tips of his hair were turning blue, instead of black. A deep navy blue, and it mixed in well with the dark black. But it was a change. Marcus stood and put out his hand in greeting. "Christopher, it's nice to finally meet you." One of them must have told him not to call me Chris. It wasn't the end of the world, and I wouldn't fly off the handle at people shortening my name, but I didn't prefer it. For people I didn't know and weren't close friends, I preferred my full name. Likewise, Marcus. I shook firmly, and he matched my strength. Interesting. We received the request for an additional transport rather late, but we were able to construct one in time. Everything is all set and ready for our departure. Marcus started. We estimate the travel to take 5 days depending on the current and any interruptions. Oh, thank the Lord. 5 days to go from Minnesota to St. Louis was a godsend. The same trip over land would take months. Bless rivers and their expedited travel. That sounds good. But I suspect that isn't the reason you wish to talk to me about. Travel plans could go through Abigail or my assistant. Not something I cared overly much about. No, it's not, Marcus said. I suspect others will be there by the time we arrive, and showing up together in one group will paint a certain picture. I'm not sure how much you've kept up with the political situation, but it's not good. The Stormbringer, as he calls himself, took over much of the Midwest. His territory extends from Lake Michigan to the Ohio River. Anything to the east or west that wants to get through has to go through his territory. A large portion of the coast is under the control of someone called the Admiral. Information on him is low, but we know he's former military. No one was able to confirm if he was an actual admiral or not. The reservation to the west of here has been forming a large war party we suspect is already on their way south. And that's only what we know. Our information can only get so far, and much of the South is a mystery to us, but we estimate at least a few other major factions stationed down there. My face was impassive at his descriptions, and I knew what Marcus was getting at. Of the factions he listed off, a few had already gone to war. Chicago was conquered through war, and I suspected a few more fell for similar reasons. If we showed up together, his enemies would become my enemies. We knew he was on bad terms with the reservation and a pylon in Iowa. That would be two right away. Plus, we were far to the north, detached from any potential expansion by conquest, but Marcus wasn't. If someone sought to expand to the north, they would eventually run into and potentially fight Marcus. If we were seen as allies, that would add another potential enemy. It was nice to see his concern, but he forgot about one thing. Abigail was the worrier, not me. If any of that was to happen, then it was going to happen. I didn't care. Our partnership with Marcus was worth more than that. He'd already been a great help for my family, and the threat of a few enemies wasn't going to deter me. And, based on his strength, I doubted a continued relationship would end badly for us. I understand, I said, and I don't care. If any wish for a fight, I will give them one. Marcus chuckled. I was told you would say that. While it's good to hear, I would be remiss if I didn't inform you of what you're getting into. I already owe you a great debt. You've been a great boon for us as well. My family means the world to me, and you've given them the opportunity to grow stronger. I said, and the opportunity to live longer. The dark thought was unwelcome, and I banished it quickly. But you did leave out one important faction. To the northwest of here sits another you would be wary of. Butting up against the mountains, near where Calgary used to be, sits Mountainside. We've had sparse communications with them, but we know the leader is at least a baron already, I said. And we both know the strength required to become one. Marcus and his city went through a massive period of growth after defeating the bugs. Without a looming threat, they burst into advancing. Pylon upgrades, construction, everything they couldn't or didn't waste manpower on. We also have word of a few more pylons to the west. We aren't positive, but we believe one sits where the Yellowstone National Park used to, I said. While Marcus's intel was mainly from the southeast, mine was from the west. The reservation cut him off from anything to the west, which made him uninformed of the happenings further out. Plus, after receiving Mountainside's letter, we spent most of our scout manpower trying to find it, which led to a great deal of intel on the situation. Our talk of potential threats and factions to watch out for continued, but nothing substantial was brought up. We both knew that everything would depend on the gathering. With power readily available and people's inflated sense of importance, enemies could be made with a look. Grudges would be held and slights would be remembered. We didn't worry about most of the pylons we knew about. Marcus detailed a few that hadn't grown large enough to matter. Not every pylon had powerhouses at the helm or people behind it that could push it further. Most were brought up simply so we were aware of them. Meeting him was nice. Meeting Ashton came with its own circumstances, but meeting Marcus was a breath of fresh air. He was amenable, friendly, and most of all, a man I got along with. Ashton was okay, if the debacle with the mine wasn't considered, but we were too different. Chatting here felt easy, welcome even. It wasn't long before all our respective information ran dry. Both of us sat looking out the window, just looking out over people doing this or that. I can't believe how much things have changed, I said, feeling nostalgic. I was in this city once. It was a long time ago, but it was funny to remember. You were? Marcus asked, surprised. Yeah. Came up here for a football game. I said, they just built their new stadium and it was nice. The memory was a fond one. Gabriel didn't care for sports, so it was just me and my dad who went. The tickets were expensive, but it was well worth it in my opinion. I doubt it's still standing, I commented sadly. Both of us felt sorrow for that. Marcus probably for a part of his hometown being destroyed, and me because the memory I associated with it didn't feel the same. What about your hometown? Marcus asked. How did it fare? His question drew me to a halt. I hadn't thought about it much. Ever since we started building the city, that was what I considered home. I don't actually know, I said. We left so quickly I never got a chance to see the changes. The last I remembered, it was being fought over by two different factions. I didn't even remember their names. I wonder who won. Chapter 256. If you call, I'll come. Marcus Shieldwell. The meeting he'd been nervously preparing for was going surprisingly easily. When the annoying light thrower was here, he told enough stories to get a picture, but that wasn't enough to base anything on. Being around family and a stranger were completely different. Going into it, Marcus wanted to make sure this partnership did well. They had already helped more than any other faction had. They didn't ask for much, and it would be a benefit to both cities if they kept up their trade. Letting them use the treasure freely hurt the mercantile side of his brain, but they more than deserved it after the amount of help they provided. Marcus wondered if he would have given them access if they hadn't. If they heard about it after the fact and asked to use it, would he have let them? There'd be a price, of course, but that would be dangerously close to giving his enemies strength and the weapons needed to stab him in the back. Those thoughts were unwarranted as that wasn't how it went, but it was food for thought. No one else had asked, and he tried to keep the existence of the treasure a secret, but Marcus doubted that would hold for long. The dense waves of pure water mana were noticeable. Extremely noticeable. Marcus wouldn't be surprised if someone was plotting for it already. Yet another reason he needed this partnership to go well. He held something dangerous in his hands that he would rather die than give up. Something that precious would be fought over. It was only a matter of time. When the time came, if he wasn't enough, he'd need friends to call on. And the man in front of him seemed like the perfect friend. Christopher was shorter than he imagined. Still above average, but a few inches shorter than himself. His facial structure and hair color matched the previous members of his family Marcus had met, but he was so much different than them. The man practically reeked of blood. The vibe he gave off wasn't murderous or demonic in any way, but it was clear that he'd spilled a considerable amount of it in his time. Mixing the fact he'd slaughter thousands, if not tens of thousands, with the fact he felt sturdier than a mountain, and Marcus had trouble thinking of ways he'd take him down. Not that it would come to a fight, but matching himself up with those he met and evaluating the potential outcome of a fight was second nature by now. He even did it to his own men. It was a habit that developed after so many brushes with death, and Marcus would be surprised if Christopher hadn't done the same the moment they laid eyes on one another. "Oh, before I forget, we've been trying to find a better way to communicate over long distances now that phones don't work, but this is the best we've come up with. A bit primitive, but it works in a pinch," Christopher said while pulling out two objects. "The rocks are paired through an enchantment. Break one and the other shatters." The man didn't demonstrate, but it wasn't that hard an idea to grasp. Being so binary, we set them aside for emergencies. He then took one of the pair and slid it across the table toward Marcus. "If you break it, I will come." Marcus looked down at the unassuming rock with mixed feelings. He went into this meeting trying to draw closer ties to the man. Maybe give a few gifts, defer a few things and trade, so Frostheim made it out on the better end of the deal, but all his plans were for naught. He didn't even have to give the man anything, and he was acting like they were fast friends already. The doubtful side of him worried about betrayal, but everything he knew and saw told him the man would never do that. He wasn't sure what it was exactly that made him so confident, but that pushed him to take the rock and give his thanks. "Thank you. The same for you if you call. I will come," he said genuinely. "We've had the same issue but no luck." Most of his tinkerers, as they liked to be called, were on other more pressing projects. The boat's chief among them. Finding a way to traverse the river was more important than a way to communicate. "My brother's hopeful that someone at the meeting will have found a way by now," Christopher said. Marcus shrugged. "They might have, but what's their incentive to share it? Having a superior communication network is a tactical advantage only a fool would give up willingly. Trade, money, materials. Then, if all of that doesn't work, threats," the man said nonchalantly, much too cavalier for what he just uttered. "Threats?" Marcus asked. The man didn't seem like the type. Christopher shrugged helplessly. "The last resort for when all else fails. I'm hoping they see the futility in keeping it a secret. If they figured it out, others will too, and at that point it's only a matter of time. But if for some reason they hold fast and have a death grip on the information, I'm willing to loosen that grip with force if need be." Marcus was slightly stunned. "I'm surprised, to say the least. You don't seem like the type of person to resort to threats." The man sighed darkly. "I don't want to be, but I will do what I must, and I've come to terms with that." The hesitancy made it seem like he hadn't, but Marcus wasn't going to say anything. Certain things are worth fighting for, even if it seems dishonorable. The way he said dishonorable was alarming. "I feel a swift means to communicate is worth that." "Well, I hope it doesn't come to that," Marcus said. "For both your sake and the person standing against you." There was a break after that. announcement, and it gave Marcus a chance to think about it in greater detail. Would he do the same? He'd like to think he wouldn't, and that he was above making threats and resorting to something dangerously close to extortion, but he'd already done things he wasn't proud of. When he first took charge of the city, some were unhappy. He basically instilled martial law during the hardest times, taking charge of nearly every aspect of people's lives. Volunteers were abundant, but some had to be given a more forceful ultimatum. Not death, he wouldn't go that far, but exile was firmly on the table when it came to the city's survival, and everyone knew what exile meant at first. Gregory signaled a knock at the door, which meant his attention was needed. "It's unfortunate that we have to end on that note, but it seems I am needed elsewhere," Marcus said while standing up. Christopher did the same, and they said their goodbyes. As he left, Gregory slipped in the door and stood in front of his desk. Marcus internally knew that they wouldn't come to blows. His glaive wasn't even in the room, and the hammer he heard so much about was left elsewhere, as both men didn't want it to come to that. Still, it set him on edge to be next to someone who threatened him. He'd gone without that feeling for so long that its resurgence made him raw. He had to take a deep breath after the encounter was over to calm himself. "Sir, your estimation?" Gregory asked. As his right hand, Gregory was privy to a lot of information and his inner thoughts. The years together had only had them grow closer, and he knew exactly what Marcus was thinking about right now. The question was left unsaid, but it was implied. "Did Bernard manage to get a level?" Marcus asked. Bernard had been instrumental in the evaluation of outsiders. The ranger had the best skills in the city when it came to identifying threats. "Level 93 class and 87 in profession," Gregory answered. Marcus had to hold back a whistle. That was nearing D rank, but it felt so much more than that. He'd faced D ranks before. D ranks that were significantly weaker than the man he just met with. "Alone? Highly doubtful," Marcus said ruefully. "My fighting style relies on my water staying in motion. His affinity would ruin that." The words hung there for a moment. What about with Clarissa? If they had her and could somehow keep the area from freezing his water, the fight would be a lot closer, but even with that advantage, Marcus wasn't hopeful. "I wouldn't go into it with weekend plans," he said. Gregory nodded stiffly. "Sir, there's a problem down by the docks that needs your attention. Something happened to one of the piers." Marcus sighed. "If it wasn't one thing, Austin. Come on, little man. You can do better than this," Austin taunted. It was always fun to get a few pointer sessions in. His latest victim was doing far better than he'd estimated. "You have a fancy new bloodline, yet you still can't hit me," he goaded. The next volley of icicles sent at him had some power behind them, forcing him to pull on his anchor to evade the attack. It was closer to hitting him than he cared to admit. If he was going all out, they wouldn't come close to even hitting his shadow, but they had agreed to keep the spar even. Gabriel didn't have an anchor yet, which made it hard for him to compete against a person who did. Austin agreed to use it sparingly, as being forced to not use it was pointless. No enemy would hamstring themselves in a real fight. Another round of spells was fired from the mage, and Austin continued to dance around them. He shattered some with his spear, but his speed was enough to force most of the spells to be wasted. His stamina was a lot higher than Gabriel's mana, of that much he was sure. Mages were all the same to fight. They stayed mostly stationary, which made the origin of their spells fixed. All he had to do from there was keep his lateral movements erratic, and they'd struggle to land anything. Only those with devastatingly widespread spells or insane manipulation and accuracy could hit him, or the few who actually moved and could launch spells from further away, but those were rare. Most weren't up to snuff, and the fight usually ended when Austin got close enough to spear them through. It was sad how many people thought being able to shoot off spells made them invincible. A spear through the throat ended them no matter how amazing their spells were. Gabriel's power spiked, and 3 phantom tails sprouted from his lower back. The ice took on a new form, and all of his spells became increasingly harder to dodge. Somehow, it felt like they were launched in tandem with one another, like they were somehow linked, but that was insane. Austin could barely link 4 skills together, and at the rate Gabe was firing them off, he'd long surpassed Austin's limit. Is it his bloodline? No, that wasn't it. It improved other aspects too much for there to be another thing it did. It was already a stronger boost than Austin gave it credit for. Boosting skills like that was too much even for that. Sparring took his mind off the fact he wasn't at the meeting with Chris and Marcus. He so wanted to see how the two interacted, but he was shunned from attending. Well, he wasn't shunned, just asked not to go, which was essentially the same thing. Chris wanted to form an unbiased opinion of the man without Austin there to derail the conversation. Not like I'd do anything too bad. Knowing the both of them, they were probably talking about something stupid. Gabriel couldn't keep his bloodline burning for too long as he was still new to it. He hadn't had the chance to strengthen it yet like the rest of them had. After he ran dry, there wasn't much he could do and the spar came to an end. Gabriel still had mana in the tank, but they weren't going all out to begin with. After they ended, Austin had a thought. A cheeky thought. The last time he was here, there had been some fun to be had. Gabe was a strapping lad, a bit booky, but that was what his older cousin was for. Chris would be a spoilsport and say no, but young, oblivious Gabe would be up for it. Maybe. Gabe, how do you feel about going out with me? It'll be fun. His grin was wide and inviting. Chapter 257, Great Start. Chris. The waves of pressure felt suffocating. The thickness of the air and pressure bearing down on me made it hard to breathe, like sucking syrup through a straw. The sheer density of the mana was like nothing I'd ever seen before except for once. My trip up north, but that mana didn't feel suffocating. The purity was another that stood out, but not nearly as much as how dense it was. Standing near the stony orb, I felt like I was drowning even though my head wasn't underwater. Mana affinities were odd like that. An area saturated enough in one type would cause effects similar to that affinity. Just walking felt like I was swimming through the air. The north, to outside observers, would feel like freezing to death. Being in Vincent's Forge with all the fire mana felt like I was about to combust randomly. The only other high-density area I'd been in was nature. The band in Wisconsin we passed through that was rife with the stuff made my body feel like it was overflowing with vitality. Fighting here would be difficult. Ice could freeze water, science dictated that much, but magic had a way of evening things out. Just because science said ice froze water, didn't mean that I would excel against it at every opportunity. In an area this fixated in water would take my entire mana pool to freeze, and even then, I wasn't confident in holding it frozen for long. Even with my newly expanded capacity. Tactics had never been my strong suit, but I could see what this would mean for the future. I built my city the farthest north I could for the ice. Mountainside did the same for Earth. Everywhere, pylons and cities were probably springing up around treasures or areas like this, drenched in the desired affinity or affinities. This meant if, for whatever reason, we had to siege down a city or attack another person, we'd be fighting through a major disadvantage on top of being the attacker. I knew that already. It wasn't hard to guess that, but feeling it and knowing it were vastly different. Standing in such an area and experiencing it placed the entire picture into frame. It also didn't help that while I would be at a disadvantage, anyone with a water affinity would be tremendously stronger. Not only would their spells and skills be stronger, but they'd recover much faster than others. If the only mana they absorbed was water mana, pure water mana like this, they wouldn't have to filter anything out. They wouldn't have to waste time turning it into their affinity. Their mana would regenerate much, much faster than those with any other affinity. Fire and lightning especially. What do you think? Abigail asked. As my tour guide, she was standing next to me staring at the orb with longing. It feels like I'm drowning, I said brashly. You don't feel it? She asked, turning to me. The sound of the ocean, the crashing waves, and the feeling of pure bliss? I stared at her questioningly. I felt none of that. No, I hear nothing and feel nothing except for being smothered to death with a wet pillow. Honestly, the feeling was near being waterboard. Oh, she said sadly, like I was the one missing out. Was there anything else you wanted to see? We had a few hours of free time left in the day, and there was a few things I wanted to do. Seeing the treasure was one of them. I'd never seen anything like it and wanted to lay eyes on it. The only thing close was the mine, but that had an assortment of various affinities and could only match up in mana density. Let's go to the town square then. That's the most interesting, she said and moved away from the river. The treasure was on the northern end of the city, with the docks being further south. The river split the city nearly in two, but most of the buildings were on the western side. The bridge we saw connected the two. The eastern portion was mainly fields. Crops were already in the ground and growing well. Vibrant green shoots were poking through and reaching into the air with vigor. The water being so magical most likely caused an increase in growing speed. Or they had insanely high-level farmers. My guess was the former. Abigail led me through the streets and various marketplaces that had sprung up. It was less packed than expected. People were still out and about moving through the different stalls, but it was less than I imagined for a city of this size. People must be at home before we leave, spending what time they can. I had little doubt Abigail had done this before with her husband, scouting what was for sale and venturing around the first time she was here. She knew where to turn and navigate through the maze of stalls easily. They had an assortment of goods for sale, but there were some key areas they were lacking in. Finished crafts being one of them. Weapons and armor were scarcely seen being up for sale. Even the nicer shops didn't have them, or if they did, there weren't many. Most were gobbled up by those who needed them. While there was an abundance of farmland and stone, metal and leather were rather scarce, making finished goods with those products in demand. Metal swords, weapons, plate or chain armor, even leather armor was hardly seen in shops. We brought some along with us at Jonathan's recommendation, and now I could see why. He and the other merchants were probably having a field day selling it all. We brought what we could, but we also brought base materials as well. What leather and metal we could spare. I mainly left Jonathan in charge of exports and trading, but even I could see the value in what he was doing. That did make me wonder how future trading would work. The journey took just under a month, and it wasn't that dangerous. But that was because of the size of our group. How much of an upcharge would they put on things to move it back and forth? We had traders and merchants who already said about moving back and forth between the fort and Frostheim, but not many picked the route between Frostheim and the twins. Maybe sending the orders with them will entice them enough? Bah, Jonathan will figure it out. Touring the city and seeing all the various things they had was rather fun. I'd had such a hand in my own city that it lost the novelty this one still held. Walking up and down the streets of Frostheim didn't carry the sense of wonder these did. I half expected to see a brothel. I joked after passing by a rather packed tavern. Abigail choked and slapped me on the shoulder. Why would you expect that? I don't know. A city with this many people. I shrugged. It's the oldest profession in the world for a reason. I doubt the change killed it off. Abigail scoffed. These people just finished fighting for their lives and are about to do it again. Why would there be that? I don't know, but it makes sense. I said, you heard the same things I did during our trip. It was like traveling with rabbits. Seeing a chance to poke the bear, I continued. You think they have professions for that kind of thing? Oh, what about skills? Every further word only made her expression turn darker. I don't want to talk about this, she said curtly. I sincerely wished to push my luck but held back. Changing the subject instead. Where's Gabriel? I thought he was supposed to be touring the city with us. He ran off with Austin. Austin said something about he's a better guide than I am. Abigail muttered. Wonder what those two are up to. Austin and my brother got along fine, but it was rare to see the two together. They were just too different. It was similar to me and Austin's brother. Connor and I could talk, but I didn't go seeking him out if I wanted someone to hang out with. Our age difference didn't help, but now that he was older, it wasn't as much of an issue. Oh well, I said. We'll see them when we depart tomorrow morning. Our sleeping conditions were great. Marcus set aside a building for us while everyone else made do with tents or spare rooms. It was a bit much to expect housing for all 800 of us, but I at least got a good room. Being in charge had its perks. The morning hours were a bit chaotic as last-minute preparations and packing were underway. Boats had to be loaded and people said goodbye. It was much like how we left. The plan was for 3 boats to lead side by side with the strongest we had at their front, which meant me, Marcus, and somehow Austin. We weren't the only people stationed at the front. as others were with us, spread out over the three. There were also a few set to bring up the rear. Most of those were the elites from Marcus's city, but I had Elliot and a few stronger guards join them. Hal's sight and scouting was too valuable to put him in the back, or he would have joined his fellow captain. My marching orders were to stand at the front and make sure nothing had the will to attack, which meant flaring my aura to dissuade the weaker beasts and beating off the stronger ones. Or dumber ones. It didn't matter which. I contested that I wasn't the best fit for such a job in my head but didn't say anything aloud. I was mainly a melee fighter. To dissuade anything, I had to jump in the water, which didn't sound fun. But, in the name of cutting our travel down tremendously, I would do it. Marcus and Austin had it easier. Austin's light worked perfectly and it would be like spear fishing while Marcus could slice through the water. But I wasn't complaining. No, the fact they could stand at the helm and swing their weapons lazily didn't affect me at all. Up we go. The last of the cargo is stored. Now it's time for people. The man in charge of the boat I was assigned called out, "Be careful loading, the ramp's a little wet." Seeing my cue, I walked up onto the boat with little issue. Abigail and Jonathan were both ready behind me and followed me up. Sophia and Grace, Abigail's assistant, followed after. Then the rest came aboard. The ship swayed under my feet and I could feel it rocking back and forth. Jonathan similarly had to steady himself, but Abigail was absolutely fine. "When's the last time you were on a boat?" Jonathan asked, seeing as we both had to take a moment. "Geez, how long has it been?" "The change happened 2 years ago, but before that, my trip to Cumberland?" "When was that?" 6 years ago?" I wasn't sure. "About the same for me," he said. "I don't like this. It feels weird." "Honey, are you getting seasick?" Abigail asked, but Jonathan shook his head. "No, it just feels weird. Like I'm on unsteady ground." Technically he was, but I didn't say that. "Where's Austin and Gabriel?" I asked. I hadn't seen the two since we got here. After the meeting with Marcus, they hadn't shown back up. "No idea." "Oh, there they are." A few boats over, Austin hobbled up onto the deck, followed slowly behind by Gabriel. Both of them looked worn out and like they'd seen better days. If I wasn't mistaken, they looked hungover. "What in the foo?" I was cut off. "Did that fucker go drinking without me?" "Austin," Abigail called over the crowd. "Come over here for a second." Austin winced at the loud noise but looked up and squinted. The fact he had to squint spoke volumes considering his perception stat. He undoubtedly saw us, and the fact Abigail was waving him over. He waved back like returning a greeting and then flipped us off. "I don't think he's going to come over," I said, holding back a chuckle. Abigail looked murderous but huffed and turned away instead. Jonathan only sighed and followed after. We're off to a great start. Chapter 258, Crude Applications. Even though we boarded early and most things were already strapped down, it still took us a good chunk of time to finally shove off and begin moving. It wasn't long, barely an hour or so, but it gave everyone time to grow accustomed to the boat and walking around. Looking at Abigail and her ability to instantly be fine, I revised that statement. It gave time to those who needed it. Jonathan was still visibly uncomfortable, but there was nothing I could do about that. I was getting there, but it was still odd to have the give under my feet when I walked, but I was making do. Most of my strength came from my legs when I swung, and having that taken away took some adjusting. I wasn't sure if what I felt was real or not, but it was like I was heavier. The boat we were on was large enough to store hundreds of crates of materials as well as house nearly 100 people, yet it felt like my steps caused it to rock back and forth. When comparing my weight to the boat's, it wasn't something that should be happening, and it made me nervous. Are my feet pushing off too hard? Even adding the armor I wore and my hammer, it wasn't enough to cause such a disturbance. Nothing we knew said we would get heavier as we leveled. "Raise the anchor." The call went out and I didn't get any more time to think about it. The rush when creating the boats forced the shipyards to focus on certain things above others. The main thing they had to do was make sure the hull was strong enough so it wouldn't sink when attacked. We were set to try and not let that happen, but they had to reinforce the hulls anyway, just in case. In doing so, there were certain things that were left out of the finished product. Masts and sails being one of them. Since our destination was downstream, the boat surviving the journey was deemed more important than putting sails on it. Water mages could boost our speed, but other than that, we were dependent on the current. Oh, and there were oars, but that much was obvious. Honestly, the thing was closer to one giant canoe than it was to a boat, but I wasn't going to complain. After pushing off, the river brought us up to speed pretty quickly. There were smaller bursts that caused us to lurch forward that I guessed came from water mages, but I couldn't see them from where I was. The first few hundred feet had already been cleared before we were set to leave, which made it smooth sailing for the beginning, but we were quickly approaching the area that hadn't been cleared yet, which meant it was time to start being deterring. Specifics didn't matter. I was on the far right while Marcus stood in the middle and Austin took up the left. Our 3 vessels had over a dozen following behind, and we had to make sure nothing too strong decided we were a tasty snack. Stepping up to the front, bow, stern, the front portion, I readied myself for anything that could hinder our travel. Marcus and Austin did the same, and as we passed over into uncharted territory, I could feel the other 2 ramping up. Auras were weird. I still didn't know enough about them. How they worked was shrouded in mystery, as I always had a bigger fish to fry. Still, I could feel the other 2 loosen their hold, and I did the same. Marcus's being closer made his easier to feel. Feel wasn't even the right word, but nothing else came close to the sensation. His felt heavy, like a tremendous weight was only waiting to be unleashed. Like it was holding back a large wave that could come crashing down any second. The strength of it surprised me. Having a good hold on your aura was still something people were working through. I had a decent control over mine, but some still leaked out. Marcus had a better hold than I did, as I never expected his to be so large. There was also something noble about it. It wasn't a large portion and felt more like a light tint compared to the overall impression. But it was unmistakable now that I could feel it all without him shielding it. I'd felt Austin's many times before. It was hard to keep a handle on it when fighting, which let me get a good grasp of his before now. Not to be left out, I loosened my grip and felt as it expanded out. Letting it out felt like a weight leaving my shoulders, and I let out a breath in relaxation. Felt good. Maybe this is why letting go while fighting feels so good. Not as stuffy. Your touch is as crude as ever. A voice whispered in my ear. A voice I knew well. Quickly turning my head, I saw Gabriel smirking at me. It's not often I get to be the better one. Let me savor this for a moment. Oh, shove off. How are you doing that? I said. The people around me took on confused looks, but I ignored them. Hearing is a lot harder than speaking, but I'm guessing you asked how I was doing this? I nodded, since it didn't seem like he could hear me. That, my dear brother, is because of skill. It's what I've been trying to teach you. The bastard was saying it was a skill issue. Jackass. I've been busy, I said, even though I doubted he could pick up on it. I know that you've had your hands full. I'm just jerking your chain. I narrowed my gaze at his response. He shrugged. I said hearing is hard. Not that I couldn't do it and you only said 3 words. I gave him a look. Well, I'll start with what auras are. Or at least what I think they are. It's been a bit of a roller coaster figuring that out. Gabriel waved his hand back and forth. It doesn't matter. The way I see it, and the only way that makes any logical sense, is that they are a part of your body. Not in the physical sense, but in a deeper sense. I first thought it was because of magic, but that theory didn't pan out. Mana does a lot of things, but even without a strong mana pool or magical abilities, people can still have a strong aura, which disproved that idea. You did a great deal with that. The opposite is also true, though. Strong magic and a weak body can still produce a powerful aura. So, if it isn't magical and it isn't physical, then it had to be option number 3. Spiritual. Gabriel was literally pacing back and forth on the boat over like it was some lecture he was giving. Which was close to the truth, as I had no way to talk back, which let him go on unnecessary tangents. A part of me wanted to go over there and have this conversation normally, but I didn't. I'd let him have his fun. Which also turned out to be wrong. Even people without spirit anchors had auras. Myself included. In the end, I figured it was something deeper, more intrinsic to who you are. I wasn't sure what was more intrinsic than physical, magical, or spiritual, but then again I wasn't the expert. See, auras increase as you level and gain power. If you upgrade your law, your aura gets stronger. If you refine your body, your aura gets stronger. If you form your spirit anchor, your aura gets stronger. But it doesn't stop there. If you add stat points, your aura gets stronger. Gain a skill. Upgrade a skill. Win a fight. Everything. It took a lot of testing, but I finally found out that auras were more than just those three. Physical, magical, spiritual. They are a reflection of everything. Even through. However he was speaking, his tone was noticeably excited. Now, that's where my experiments end and the rest is merely my assumption, but I think they're a representation of the soul. We were told our soul holds all the essence we've accumulated and that certain experiences can result in our soul growing. Nothing we've seen can interact, impact, injure, or in any way touch upon it. For all we know, that's the realm of gods, but they have to do something more. So, I feel that my theory has merit. He ended his rant and turned to face me with a smile. Slowly, very slowly, I mouthed, "That explained nothing." "Oh, sorry, I got carried away. Think of it like gravity. Everything in the world has its own gravity, no matter how big or small. Larger objects that have more mass have a larger gravity, while smaller objects have a smaller gravity. Auras, like gravity, are something everyone has, just some are too weak to be felt. Like how we were in the beginning. It was only after gaining some levels and becoming stronger that you started feeling it, right?" I nodded. "And then, as you grew and got stronger, your aura did too?" I nodded again and said, "How does this help me speak through it?" "Hold on. I'm getting there." He huffed. "So, if it's an intrinsic part of you and grows as you do, that means you should have the ability to control it. Even you have the ability to manipulate your aura, if a bit crudely. Pulling it in, letting it out, pressing it down on people. All I'm doing is taking that a step further." I thought back to that one time I expanded out and yelled through it. I technically didn't use it to speak, but used it to strengthen my voice so it could be heard, which was close enough. To give it a shot, instead of empowering my voice with it, I had it carry what I said. Like this. I still voiced the words, but it was quite enough that no one heard. If someone was looking, they'd see my mouth move but wouldn't hear anything. "Close," Gabriel said. "All you did was transport the sound from one place to another. What I'm doing is using it to speak directly into your ear. How was that even possible? This would be a lot easier if you could hear through your aura, but you can't. Then, I wouldn't even have to say anything, I could just send it to you through the connection. How do you use it to speak? It has no vocal cords." "Ah, you're thinking too literally," he said. "Stop trying to use logic. Nothing about how this works is logical. Imagine it like it's a part of your body. Even though it's far away, project what you want to say through it." I focused in on the portion of my aura surrounding him. It was an odd exercise to imagine, but I'd seen weirder. Imagining what he said, I projected. "Testing? Testing?" Gabriel cringed and covered his ears, and Austin looked over at me. Even from over here, I could hear my own voice. "Not so forceful," Gabriel said. "Damn near blew out my eardrums. Try whispering. Scratch that. Imagine whispering. Then take it down a notch. Like this." I said. He didn't cringe this time, and I wasn't able to hear myself. "Better," he said. "But it could still use some work." Gabriel's smile turned nearly sadistic. "Guess what?" For some reason, I felt a creeping dread. "We have 5 days together and you have no excuses. By the time we arrive, I'll whip you into shape." Chapter 259, Sharing is Caring. You don't have to manhandle it. It's a part of you. Not some tool you have to wield. Treat it like it is. "You're being too forceful again. Gentler. Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?" Frustration was building up inside me, but I pushed it down and focused once more on the task at hand. The first day had gone remarkably easy. The river denizens were mainly avoiding us, but there were a few that had tried their luck. I had to jump in the river a few times, but it wasn't all that bad. Frost armor kept me from getting soaked, and I had more than enough upper body strength to pull myself back aboard. Marcus could just lazily swing his glaive and the water would spilt apart like it was meant to be. The two sides would come crashing together and a pool of blood would be the only indication that something died. Austin by far had the most fun out of it. He would giggle to himself while launching ray after ray of light. He did it so often that I was positive he was killing things that didn't need to be. Playing a hand at spearfishing. Mainly, the trip was boring. I couldn't train on the boat as it would rock too much and I had to pay too much attention to threats to do any deep thought. Even though I doubted I'd accomplish it, I still spent time thinking about my laws. Tier 3 was a large jump, one that felt insurmountable as I was right now. Having a lead in Frozen Rift helped, but even that didn't help. Gaining a Tier 1 law took a concept. Gaining Tier 2 took expanding that concept further. Tier 3 was so much more than that. It wasn't just gaining new concepts. Well, it was, but one wasn't going to cut it. The end goal of laws was to continue until you encompassed everything there was about a law. My ice law wouldn't be complete until I mastered everything there was to be about ice. Every concept, every aspect, everything. That being the case, if all it took to take another step was to realize another concept, a Tier 6 law, a master law of ice would only hold a paltry few concepts, which was far from the truth, and even further from reality. Tier 3 was already out of reach, let alone Tier 6. I knew I was rushing, but I couldn't help but try. It wasn't like I had anything better to do. Laws were supposed to take years of meditation to gain enlightenment. Tier 1 usually came easily enough to people with an affinity for a certain one, but beyond that was supposed to be a trial. Something extensive time and effort was dedicated toward. Like how it took years for my wind law to reach Tier 2. Well, just under 2 years, but it was still a long time compared to my ice law. That had reached Tier 2 in 3 months. Tier 3 would take much longer. I'd explored various lines of thought trying to push the envelope, and I knew my law had grown, but it was still far away from the next threshold. Seeing the mountain I had to climb and knowing I wouldn't be reaching the summit anytime soon, I usually focused on something else that was more pressing towards my evolution. But now that the to-do list was empty, I was back trying to puzzle out how to push things along. If the rough timeline I'd come up with held true, I'd be ready to evolve to D rank in a few months. Whatever this obelisk thing turned out to be would undoubtedly have fighting involved. Heavy fighting, which, if becoming a Baron was any indication, would net me a few levels closing further in on capping out. It'd take a while to get back home, but I'd spend the next few months crafting like a madman, and bam, I'd be ready. Well, except for the needed parts. Parts were becoming an increasing worry. A worry that extended beyond only me. Austin was capped already, Abigail was close, and I knew Marcus had to be from how powerful he felt. If so many people in my immediate vicinity were close to the threshold, many more across the planet had to be. Austin was holding out for a reward from the test. He thought that, like the tutorial, participating in the test would net us something in return. His argument was based on the fact not everyone was participating. In his words, it'd be utter bullshit if we all go down there, fight an army of whatever gets thrown at us, and then get nothing. Some might even die, yet we receive the same as people who stayed home and did nothing. Not only would that be bullshit, but I'll be pissed. While he was a touch rough with his words, I felt his reasoning was sound. It would be bullshit to get nothing. It would also make incentivizing people to fight future tests difficult. If they didn't care about keeping our planet protected, they had no reason to fight. I was trying not to get my hopes up, but if it turned out that there wasn't going to be a reward, we had to figure out a way to evolve from other avenues. It was a path that everyone needed, so at least there was common interest driving the effort forward. Similar to if any found a better way to communicate, if someone had ties to get evolution parts, that would be something worth fighting over. It would also make the faction or factions responsible public enemy number one. If only they could evolve, everyone else would be pissed, me included. If all else fell through, we'd have to find a way. If it was something everyone was bottlenecked by, waiting wouldn't be all that bad. It would give me a chance to explore other things. Crafting for one. Most of my time was spent on combat or ways to increase my personal strength. Enchanting was so intriguing, could do so many things, create such bizarre and wondrous things, yet I hadn't even scratched the surface yet. Exploring how dungeons worked would also be fun. Taking another trip north. There were so many things I'd put off doing. My aura that was spread in front of the ships encountered a monster coming our way and quickly, cutting off that train of thought. I sighed and reached for my hammer. I got it! Austin called out and his spear began to light up. The light gathering didn't last long and soon discharged into the water. Its speed was instantaneous to my eye, but the sound of evaporating water and the hole left in the river was clear to see. Abigail, grab that. It looks tasty. Austin called over the sizzling water not even a second after launching his attack. An orb of water separated from the river, pulling up an odd-looking fish that Austin deemed tasty. It looked like a monstrous bass or trout, or bluefin. I wasn't the most well-versed in fish. Try not to burn it this time, I mocked Austin secretly. Being able to whisper to someone discreetly was more fun than I thought. The best part was no one else knew I said anything. This wasn't the first time Austin deemed something worthy of eating, and instead of leaving it to someone with a cooking profession, or better yet, cooking experience, he tried using his skills with fire to do it, which ended up burning most things due to lack of control. Austin's excuse was because things were too delicate and it wasn't his fault that it burned at such low heat. Leaving the man to experiment, I turned back to my aura. Training my aura had shaped up to increase what I could do with it. Before exploring what it could do, I could at most pull it in, let it out, and press down on people. Now, I could talk through it and use it as detection. The clarity of what I felt through it was still being worked on, but I could now feel when something strong came into range. It was like a radar scanner, but it could only pick up things big enough to cause it to react. Low-level fish and people didn't give off enough response in order to feel that they were there. On the other side, I also got a lot better at keeping it contained. Knowing that it was possible to get a response through aura sensing, Gabriel and I tried to conceal ourselves against one another. Gabriel normally won and it was 100% rigged against me, but it was still good practice. I was never one for stealth, but it felt like a handy skill to practice. I mainly trained to sense things rather than hide from things, though. It was a much more needed skill than the other. I could punch, hammer, freeze, and all around make things have a bad day in various ways, but any sort of perception of my surroundings was severely lacking. Most of my fights were in the dungeon or through the waves thrown at us, pylon upgrades included. All of those had one thing in common. The monsters came to me. My trip north made it clear that I was missing a few fundamental skills in my repertoire. Sensing things being one of them. Using Gabriel's analogy further, if my aura was a part of my body, then the area it covered should be something I could sense. It was using that imagery that I expanded that part of what it could do. The area it covered wasn't too large, big enough to encompass a radius of a few hundred feet, but that could be changed. Just like I spread it out over the fort, I did the same now. Doing so decreased what I could sense but greatly enlarged the area covered. Gabriel ranted about, if you compress it into a wall you can then rotate it around you like a radar. Then, you don't have to compromise between lower clarity and larger area. All of my attempts to compress it into a wall were met with failure. The best I could do was turn the sphere into an oblong teardrop-looking thing. It didn't help that so many other auras were competing in the same space. Through trial and error, I found training in a spot without someone else's aura was much easier to accomplish than in one already occupied. I wasn't sure if occupied was the right word to describe it, but it was like fighting for the same space. Our auras naturally collided and fought one another or anything else that wasn't the same, which increased the difficulty of trying to do anything. Funnily enough, that could be stopped. I noticed that Austin's aura fought mine a lot less than Marcus's did. Whether that was because Austin and I knew each other better and we fought together often, or if it was because we had a higher level of trust, I wasn't sure. Gabriel didn't know either. He claimed, I'm not an expert. I mostly play around with this in my workshop between attempts at enchanting. Not many people are around, so it's not something I have to worry about. Auras were weird, I'd found. There was a lot more about them than I first realized, and having my brother put me on the right track was only the start. Deep down, I could feel like we were only scratching the surface of what they could do. It was times like this that I hated not being able to go to a pylon and buy a book. So much information I just knew was out there, yet we couldn't access it. We had to play around in the dark reinventing the wheel. While that may be fun for some people, it was extremely upsetting to others. It was a growing frustration I was having. It also made me look at this future gathering differently. When I first heard of the obelisk and thought of how everyone would end up in the same spot, my initial feeling was one of dread. Everyone who was strong enough, owned a pylon, or led a faction would most likely be there. It would be a massive contest to be the best. Either to stand out, arrogance, or just the need to portray their strength. It would turn into something I didn't care for. I knew I'd do the same. The way I went about things was bound to rub people the wrong way. But that was something I knew would happen. Something that was accounted for. I wasn't going to change it either. It was better to be myself and have the cards land how they may, than bend over backwards to accommodate other people. And if the way I thought was common, which I expected it would be in people used to being at the top of their local food chain, then this gathering was bound to be intense. But, now that I got past those thoughts and moved on to what could be accomplished, it painted the entire thing in an entirely new light. And it was a big if, people came together and shared things, we could move forward in so many ways. While it would be nice, I'd settle for only a few things. A way to communicate. The way forward to evolve. Maybe even portals? Teleporting was infinitely better than spending months on the road. Hell, we were only going from one point of the continent to another on the same continent. There was still so much of the world to see. Chapter 260, Everyone is Coming. Hendrix. Months ago. Come on. You can't die on me. 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Gonzalez kept time aloud as he pounded on Jackson's chest with both hands. His entire body rising and falling in a steady rhythm. All of his group held their breaths in worry. Even Grant, the newest to their group, watched on with rapt attention as Gonzalez applied CPR. Waiting for Jackson to wake up. Guh guggle. Jackson spat out water and struggled to draw in enough air to replace it. Hendrix felt like an additional 10 years drained out of him after seeing his friend take a breath. Everyone did, as they all let out sighs of relief. Even with all their new stats and skills, fancy classes, and magic, drowning was still a very real threat. Oh, thank God! Gonzalez slapped Jackson on the shoulder roughly. I thought you were a goner. Jackson took steadying breaths and looked around wildly. You can't bury me yet. Halsey laughed at his words. Here I thought you could breathe water. Jackson coughed and spit up another mouthful of water at that. I have a water affinity. Affinity. I didn't turn into some amphibian. Of the group, Jackson had staunchly refused to become anything other than human. Gonzalez had gone all in with the change. Other than becoming even hairier from his evolution, the massive muscles were hard to miss. He was already dreaming out his next evolution and what changes he would make next. He was, Hendrix would admit, a bit obsessed with the idea. Gonzalez didn't even hesitate with his choice and quickly chose the grizzly bear as his bloodline and his evolution choices. I thought you'd walked into the light. Halsey joked. Glad to have you back. What does this make it? For times we've saved your life. Jackson, still coughing and trying to breathe correctly. If we're keeping count, I think you topped that list, Halsey. All right. Hendrix cut in before they devolved into actually listing them out. They didn't have the time for that. We've made it across. Now we need to find the damn thing and report back. Jackson, how long until you're good? I still need a few minutes, Sarge. Air's still getting to where it needs to go, Jackson said. Now that everyone wasn't huddled over his body, Hendrix looked around the riverbank. They had an insane time getting to the other side, and it had delayed them weeks to do so. The raft they ended up building got destroyed barely halfway across, and then it was a mad dash or mad swim to shore. Grant worked his healing magic, but still, it was close. Who knew things would be so tough? We'll take 30, then get a move on. Take stock and check our packs. Hendrix ordered. They'd ended up losing Jackson's pack to the current, which left them down some supplies. Thankfully, all of the important ones he carried himself, but still, they were down rations and gear. As they sat and recovered, Jackson wicked away the water soaking everyone and sent it flying back into the river. It was a boon Hendrix hadn't appreciated enough. Having to travel soaking wet was never fun. The time set to recover expired quickly, and they were soon on the move again. They were close, everyone knew they were close. The river had been their last obstacle, and now all they had to do was find the damn thing. Sarge! Larks called from deeper into the trees. I found something. The entire team converged on Lark's position, and all of them looked toward the towering obelisk poking out of the tree canopy. Well, at least it isn't small. Gonzalez laughed. We'd be looking for days if it was. The target of their search stood towering into the air and was impossible to miss. Taller than all of the trees around it and then some, the impossibly dark monolith could be seen from miles around if someone had the perception, which Lark certainly did. I don't see any threats nearby, but there are a few civilians camped out around it, Lark said. It took a moment for Hendricks to tear his eyes away from the obviously magical construction, but the words found their way. We can't call them civilians anymore, he admonished. Not when everyone was a potential threat. How many, and can you get any levels? About 100, but they're too far for evaluate. His entire team turned to him while plans were drawn up. They weren't here to liberate or fight, so he was trying to come up with non-confrontational plans that didn't end in fighting. We need to get in and out without a fight. Larks, you're on scouting duty. Find out the levels of everyone down there and report if they're above 80. Gonzalez, go further west. That might not be the only group camping around it. Jackson, try to get a good look at the obelisk. See if the reports were true and if it has a timer. Grant. Hendricks hesitated. Go with Gonzalez and keep him healthy. Of all their group, Gonzalez was the most likely to run into a fight. What are you going to do, Sarge? Larks asked. Find us a spot to camp and set up the array. I have a feeling we'll be here a while. The experimental device he was sent with had strict instructions on how it could be deployed, and it was the task that would take the longest. Wards had to be set up, mana flows had to be accounted for. It was nearly above his ability to do and would have been if they hadn't sent some tools with him specifically for that task. Hendricks wasn't even halfway done by the time his team came back from their assigned tasks. There's a few hundred more on the other side, but that's about it, Gonzalez said. Most of the group down there is about level 70. A few are higher and the highest is level 97. He seems to be the leader, but there were 3 that had blockers. I couldn't pierce. Lark said. From how it appears, everything our intel says is correct. The timer is displayed on all 4 sides and it's set for the day we came back. Jackson said. All right. Hendricks said. Give me a second to think. This is undoubtedly our test. The trip here took 2 months, but could be shortened if there's a better way to cross the river. If we send word back now, they'll have a month and a half to get everything in order. That was more than enough time, but it was still cutting it close. They had people fighting all the way up and down the coast. To pull them back and send them inland would take time. If he even sends people, the odds were good that he would, but there was still the option that he wouldn't. They were stretched thin, but this took priority. Or at least, Hendricks thought so. Help me get his array set up. It's a bitch and I'm not entirely sure I'm doing it right, Hendricks said. Now that they had the information they needed, the next course of action was to report it back. The Admiral would do with it what he wished. It took well into the night to get everything right, and with the time difference, it would be even worse on the East Coast, but this was more important than sleep. The array was something new some brainiac put together after some very limited testing. Hendricks wasn't sure of the specifics of how it worked, but he knew the basics. Setting it up was the hardest part, and now that it was, all he had to do was activate it, which had its own intricately detailed section on how to do. It took an asinine amount of mana to work, especially over the distance they were working with, but they were prepared for that. Mana crystals were set on the various points the array required. They were rare and extremely hard to find, but they were allocated a batch large enough to use the array a few times. If they ran out, they'd be stuck up a creek without a paddle. Even with the rare crystals powering it, it still took all 6 of them flooding their mana into it to work. Any mana they could spare from their own pools saved a crystal from having to be used. Ready, he called out from inside the array. Ready. Begin. All of them began shoving as much mana into it as they could. The looped lines and graceful curves lit up so brightly they swelled with power. They burned into the ground, but the conduits would hold. At least they should hold. It took a few moments for the entire array to light up and even more after that until it was set to function. Supposedly, the array reached out to another back home that was linked. Which part of massive formation did the linking was a mystery. Hendrix was not an enchanter and didn't know the first step of decoding what he was looking at. There were supposed to be people watching the linked portion, waiting for a call to come in, but time ticked on and no one picked up the other side. Everyone was quickly running out of mana, but they continued pushing more and more into the array. Gonzalez already ran dry, as he had the least among the team. Click. The connection crackled and sounded muffled, but Hendrix sighed in appreciation. If it had failed, they'd have to rest up and do the process all over again. Come in, this is Foxtrot Tango 1. Do you read me? We read you, Foxtrot Tango 1, this is command, go ahead. The person on the other side gave the correct sign back. We located the obelisk and our intel is true. The timer reads. Hendrix checked his watch to get the time right. 3 months, 14 days, 9 hours, 20 minutes, 21 seconds. 3 months, 14 days, 9 hours, 20 minutes, 21 seconds. Confirm? The operator repeated. Confirm. Awaiting orders. Hendrix replied. They'd account for the seconds afterward, subtracting it from the total. Stand by. Being told to wait as he struggled to keep the array activated was torture, but he held back from saying anything. The operator wasn't the one giving the orders, and it would take time for them to be delivered to the Admiral. Luckily, either the man was up this late at night or the messenger found him quickly. Hendrix, his voice was unmistakable. Hold at the obelisk and gather intel on everyone who arrives. Teams 2 to 8 will be making their way over and the rest of us will be right behind them. Hendrix didn't want to question the Admiral. In fact, all he wanted to say was okay, and shut the array down, but he didn't. The rest of us, sir? Hendrix knew the rest of the teams mentioned. He'd worked together with a few of them before, but this would be the first time that all 8 would be in the same place. We cannot fail this test, the Admiral said firmly. Passing whatever this turns out to be is our #1 priority. Everyone will be deployed to your position to ensure that outcome. Understood, sir. Good, he said. Clear the surrounding area if you can. Something tells me we'll need it. Over and out. The line clicked again and Hendrix sagged to the ground. His mana was empty and so was Lark's. Only Grant and Jackson were still standing, but even they were barely hanging on. We have our orders, Hendrix replied. Clear the area and await reinforcements. Who's all coming? Gonzalez asked. The 1st Brigade? No, Hendrix said, still trying to wrap his head around it. Everyone is coming. The entire team looked at him twice to make sure they heard correctly. Sir, did you say everyone? Yes, I did. Well, fuck, Gonzalez said. It's going to be a party, I guess. End of chapter 260.